Wyoming Territory, August 1881. The sound of a soft whimpering tugged Colter Hayes from his half-sleep. He sat up in his bedroll, boots already on, revolver resting on the crate beside him. The wind outside howled low through the cottonwoods, but that was not what had stirred him. That sound, thin, muffled, was coming from the shed. His shed. He grabbed the lantern and pushed open the cabin door. The night air bit through his shirt, but it was not the cold that made him move fast. He crossed the yard in long strides, boots crunching gravel, one hand on his holster. The shed stood squat in the dark, its door barely closed. The moment he opened it, the smell of damp hay and something else sweat, fear hit him. Then the lantern light caught her. A woman. She stood in the corner, shoulders squared, chin lifted, though her hands trembled. Beside her, nestled in a threadbare blanket, were 3 infants, triplets. Not a single sound came from her mouth, but her eyes said everything: worn, tired, fierce. Colter stepped forward. "You lost?" he asked, voice low. "No," she said, steady as a rifle shot. "We'll leave." Colter looked from her to the babies, then back to her. "Not without me." She blinked, taken aback. "What? You got 3 babies in my shed and no horse in sight. You are not going anywhere tonight. Or alone." She shook her head. "I did not come to stay." "I did not say you could," he said, setting the lantern down gently. "But I am not turning you out either." She hesitated. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her dress was patched and dusty. Her boots were 2 sizes too big. One of the babies let out a soft cry and she bent to soothe him, her hands gentle but shaking. "I do not want trouble," she said quietly. "I do not either," Colter replied. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. He helped her into the cabin without another word. She moved slow, as if every step cost her. The babies were bundled tight in a woven shawl, one slung across her chest, the other 2 cradled in her arms. He opened the door and held it as she passed, catching the scent of her wood smoke and wild sage. Inside, the fire was low but still warm. He stoked it and lit another lantern. She sat on the bench, her back straight, jaw clenched. Colter set out bread, dried meat, and a tin of beans. She reached for the food with one hand, the other never leaving the babies. "I'm Colter," he said as he poured water into a chipped cup. She glanced up. "Junia. Junia Rel." He nodded. "You from around here?" "No," he waited, but she did not offer more. The babies stirred softly, their tiny fists reaching out into the air. Colter watched her feed them, her movements automatic, practiced. She was young, maybe 23, but there was something older in her eyes. He pulled up a chair, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You got people looking for you?" "No," she said after a moment. "No one." The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft noises of the children. Her hands moved again, calm, sure, tending to them with a strange grace. "What are their names?" he asked. Junia hesitated, then looked down at them one by one. "Wren, Willis, and Wit." Colter gave a low whistle. "3 of them. You must be something else to keep them alive out there." She looked up then, and for the first time her voice held something like pride. "They are mine. I would walk through fire for them." He believed her. She ate slow, careful, not wasting a crumb. Afterward, she leaned against the wall, eyes fluttering closed. The babies were quiet, curled up in the basket Colter had lined with soft cloth. "You ever sleep in a bed?" he asked. She opened one eye. "Not in a while." "You can tonight. Take mine." "I am fine here." He stood. "I will not argue. You and the little ones take the bed. I will keep watch." She looked like she might protest, but then her shoulders sagged. "Thank you." As she stepped into the back room, Colter sat by the fire, watching the flames. He had not expected this. He had come west to forget a war, to build something with his own hands. But that woman, standing there in his shed with her jaw set like iron, she had stirred something in him, he thought, long gone. He did not know where she came from, or why she looked like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. But he knew one thing for sure. She was not going anywhere without him. Not now. Not ever. The sun rose slow over the hills, casting a pale wash of gold across the split rail fence and the dry creek bed beyond. Colter had dozed upright in the chair, hat tipped low, hand resting near the rifle propped against the hearth. The fire had burned down to embers, but the room still held its warmth. He heard the soft creak of the bedroom floorboards and lifted his head. Junia stepped out carrying the smallest of the babies against her shoulder, her long braid trailing down the back of her faded dress. Her eyes were clearer now, though the hollows beneath them hadn't vanished. She moved quieter than most folks he'd known, but with surety, like she'd taught herself caution the hard way. "He's got a cough," she said, voice softer than last night's. "Not bad yet, but I'm watching it." Colter stood and crossed to the stove. "Water's hot. You want me to make coffee?" She nodded, then eased down onto the bench. The baby stirred, pressed his face into her collarbone, and went still again. "I've got horehound and licorice root," Colter said as he filled the kettle. "Could make a tonic if it worsens." Her gaze flicked toward him. "You know herbs?" "Some. My mother kept a book. Pages were mostly torn out by the time I took to reading it, but I remember what she said." Junia shifted the child, careful not to wake him. "You live out here alone? 3 years now. You don't seem the hermit sort." Colter poured the coffee slow, the aroma rising between them. "Wasn't the plan. Just ended up that way." He handed her a tin cup, then poured one for himself. Junia took it without ceremony, sipped, and winced faintly. "It's strong," he offered. "I've had worse," she said. They sat with the quiet for a while, broken only by the rustle of wind through the chinks in the log walls and the occasional soft grunt from the back room. Colter didn't press her for answers. He figured she'd speak when she had words to spare. After a time, Junia said, "I worked a place outside Fort Laramie. Cooked mostly. They took me in after." Her mouth tightened. "Didn't last." He didn't ask what went wrong. He saw it in her shoulders, in the way she kept herself turned slightly sideways, always between him and the children. "You want to stay here long?" he asked. "I don't know." She traced the rim of her cup with a fingertip. "You meant what you said, about not letting us walk out alone." "I did. And if I said I'm not looking to be beholden, I'd say I'm not offering charity." She looked at him then, more directly than before. "Then what are you offering?" Colter leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "A place where no one's pushing you out, where the boys can put on weight, and you can breathe without watching every shadow." Junia studied him, her face unreadable. "You trust me just like that?" "No, but I trust what I saw. You didn't take from me. You didn't run when I found you. And you've kept 3 little ones alive through things no child should see. That's enough to start with." The sound of one of the other children crying broke the stillness. Junia stood without another word, moving through the door and into the back room. Colter heard her murmuring low, then the soft creak of the cradle he'd set up for her the night before. He let the silence settle again, hands wrapped around the warm tin. He wasn't sure what had shifted, only that something had. She hadn't flinched when he spoke. She hadn't lied. And she'd taken the coffee. That was something. Later in the day, while Junia washed diapers by the creek with her skirts hiked and pinned, Colter split wood. She didn't ask for help, but when the water grew too cold, he brought her a bucket warmed over the stove without speaking. She nodded once in thanks and kept on scrubbing. The boys were quiet, bundled in a basket beneath a shade of pine, their cheeks flushed and healthy. Junia kept glancing at them, even while working, like she had to make sure they were still breathing. Colter didn't comment. He just set another log on the chopping block. That night, after the children were down and the wind had picked up, Colter handed her a folded bundle. "My sister's old shawl," he said. "She left it here the last time she came through. Might keep the chill off." Junia brushed her fingers over the wool. "You don't keep in touch?" "She's married. Lives down near Rawlins. Sends a letter every fall. Doesn't visit much." Junia unfolded the shawl and laid it across her lap. "I had a brother once. He joined up with cattlemen when he turned 17. I never saw him again." Colter didn't speak. They sat like that, two people with ghosts at their backs, watching the fire rise and fall. When Junia stood at last to gather the children, she paused at the door. "You said you're not offering charity. Then what would you call this?" Colter met her eyes. "A beginning." She didn't answer, but when she turned away, the shawl stayed wrapped around her shoulders. The first frost came early, brushing the tops of the grass with silver before the sun had risen. Junia stood at the edge of the pasture, a quiet figure wrapped in the shawl Colter had given her. One sleeping boy strapped against her chest, the others swaddled in a crate lined with wool and set beside her feet. She watched Colter repair a broken gatepost, hammering a split rail into place with measured strikes, his breath fogging in the cold. When he straightened and saw her watching, he didn't wave, just nodded once, then turned back to his work. Later, she found him at the lean-to sharpening a draw knife. The smell of pine shavings hung in the air, and the dogs, both half wild and too old to bark, lay curled under the wagon. She stepped around them and leaned against the post. "I know the work's yours," she said, "but I'd like to do my share." He didn't look up. "You already do." "Not enough," she said. "I can mend, tack, milk, split kindling. That shed's no place for children once the cold sets in." He set the blade aside. "I've been thinking the same. There's a side room off the barn, dry and tight. If we clear it, it'll suit better. I'll take care of it." He turned toward her, picked a wood chip from his sleeve. "You ever worked livestock?" "My grandmother kept goats," she said. "Mean ones." "Good. I've got 2 milkers that need hands steadier than mine." She tilted her head. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. Traded help for lumber when I first came out." She ran a hand along the fence rail. "You built it to be alone?" "I built it to be mine." She didn't answer, but he saw the way her mouth pulled tight. She went to the barn without another word, and he let her. He knew better than to press when the past stepped between two people like a wall. By afternoon, she'd cleared every broken crate and rusted tool from the side room. When he came with an armful of wool blankets and a tin basin, she was already sweeping out the last of the straw. "I didn't think you'd get to it this quick," he said. "I don't like waiting." He helped her set the blankets down, then hung the basin on a nail. "There's a stove we can move in here. Small, but it'll keep the edge off. I'll sleep better knowing they're out of the wind." He studied the room, then her hands raw across the knuckles, dust caked under her nails. "You need salve." "No. I've had worse." He didn't press, just nodded. "You'll want to check the chimney. It draws slow." After she left to gather the boys, he stayed behind, running a hand along the beam above the door. He hadn't built the barn with anyone else in mind. But now, seeing the space prepared, the blankets laid out, it didn't feel like something taken. Felt earned. That evening, Junia accepted a plate of cornbread and boiled turnips without comment. The boys lay curled together in a basket at her feet, their limbs tangled. She ate with quiet focus, wiping each hand before touching them, even when she was only adjusting a blanket. Colter leaned against the wall, watching the fire catch in the stove. "I've got a friend comes through once a month," he said. "Brings supplies I can't get local. If there's anything you need, cloth, salt, something for the boys, you tell me." She looked at him across the flames. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. The stove ticked as it heated, and the dogs shifted beneath the table. "Because I want to," he said finally. "And because you're not just passing through." She studied him, her face unreadable, then turned her gaze back to the children. "I wasn't sure you'd say that." "I was." The wind picked up outside, brushing the corner of the roof like a slow hand. He saw the way she curled her fingers into the edge of the shawl, not shivering, just holding firm. "I'll take the early hours," he said. "You sleep when they do." "I don't sleep easy." He didn't look away. "You will." She stood then and gathered the basket, lifting it with care. When she passed him, she paused, not long, just enough. "You were right," she said. "This is a beginning." Then she stepped into the side room, the door closing soft behind her. The first snow came in the night, quiet as breath. By morning, a pale crust lay over the fields and along the fence lines, softening every edge. Junia stepped outside with a wool bundle tight against her chest. Her boots left neat tracks behind her, the only ones until Colter came across the yard with a sack of oats over his shoulder. He set it down beside the stoop. "They'll need feeding more regular now. Cold pulls the weight off them fast." Junia nodded. "I'll see to it." She adjusted the sling as wit stirred, then looked toward the shed, half-roofed now with new shingles. "You planning to finish that before the next storm?" "I was hoping to." He brushed snow off his coat. "But I'll need help holding the rafters steady." Her eyes rose to meet his. "I've handled worse than a beam." "I believe you." He knelt to check the latch on the feed bin, then paused. "I've been thinking about something." She waited, quiet. "There's a schoolhouse being built in town. Just one room, but they're hiring someone to help with the younger ones. A woman, preferably someone with a steady hand." Junia didn't speak right away. Her gaze shifted to the barn, where Wren and Willis slept in a padded crate near the stove. "I don't have letters past the basics." "They're not asking for much," he said. "Just someone who can keep order and mind the little ones while the older boys learn their sums." "I've never taught anyone," she said. "You've kept 3 alive through a hard season," Colter said. "That counts for something." Junia looked down at the snow melting on her skirt hem. "Maybe it does." Colter reached into his coat and handed her a folded notice, the paper soft from his pocket. She tucked it into her apron without unfolding it. Later, Junia sat at the table, patching a tear in one of the boys' undershirts while Colter worked over a length of rawhide at the hearth. The fire snapped, brightening the room, and the scent of pine resin drifted in from the logs stacked by the door. She glanced up. "You ever think about leaving?" He didn't look away from the leather. "Used to." "What stopped you?" "Nothing left to chase," he said. "Place like this, it don't ask much, but what it gives solid." Junia tied off her thread. "I used to think I'd end up farther west, somewhere green, where the air smells like salt." He set the strip of rawhide aside. "What changed your mind?" She met his eyes. "I stopped running." Colter stood and crossed to the stove, poured 2 mugs of boiled chicory, and set one in front of her. "You can still leave, if that's what you want." "I know." She wrapped her hands around the tin. "But I don't." The door creaked open, and a gust of cold swept through as Wren stirred in his sleep with a soft cry. Junia rose to lift him gently from the cradle. Colter watched her settle the boy against her shoulder, her hand cradling his head with practiced ease. "I've got a few planks left," he said. "Enough to build another cradle. One that rocks." Junia pressed her lips to Ren's hair. He'd like that. I'll start tomorrow. She looked over her shoulder at him. You always build things for people who might not stay? He shook his head. No, she didn't answer. But the room felt warmer than it had minutes before. That evening, after the boys were fed and asleep, Colter lit the lantern and brought out a well-worn deck of cards. You play. Junia raised a brow. I've watched plenty of men lose their tempers trying. I don't lose my temper, he said. Just sometimes my luck. She took a seat across from him. What do we play for? Questions, he said. Winner gets to ask. Junia dealt with the ease of someone who'd handled cards before. They played in silence at first, the only sound the flick of the cards and the occasional crackle from the stove. After she won the second hand, she leaned back. What was your mother's name? Letty, he said. She sang while she worked, even when she was sick. Junia nodded, then dealt again. Colter won the next round. You ever been married? No, he waited, but she didn't say more. She won 2 hands in a row and looked up. Why'd you come west? He shuffled the cards slowly. The army taught me how to shoot. Not much else. After the war, I wanted a place where no one cared about what side I stood on. Junia tilted her head. Did you fight? I did. She didn't push further. They played until the fire burned down and the lantern dimmed. Junia gathered the cards and rose, brushing her skirt smooth. I'll take the first waking. Colter opened the door to the side room while she passed through, her steps quiet, the shawl trailing behind her. Just before the door closed, she paused. Colter. He looked up. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. When the door shut behind her, he leaned back in the chair, the chill from outside curling under the door. There was no reason to mark the night as different from the one before. But he knew, in the way a man knows when a storm's about to shift, something had settled. Something had stayed. The days shortened quickly as November deepened, the snow lying thicker in the gullies and along the creek. Colter had taken to waking before the first light, checking traps near the ridge and bringing back whatever the snares gave, mostly rabbits, sometimes nothing. Junia started the stove each morning without a word, her movements quiet and assured. The boys bundled in the corner wrapped in quilted coats she'd sewn from old shirts. That morning, Colter returned with a brace of quail and a thick silence on his face. There's been talk in town, he said, setting the birds on the table. Junia looked up from feeding Wit mashed apples. What kind of talk? Marshall says a man came through asking about a woman with 3 babies. Said she took something that wasn't hers. She stood still, spoon hanging in her fingers. You think it's him? He asked. Her voice was even. If he's asking, then he's looking. And if he's looking, he won't stop. Colter leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You want to tell me what he's owed? Junia finished feeding Wit, wiped his mouth with the hem of her sleeve, and set him down in the cradle before answering. He's owed nothing. I married his brother. Not for love. For a roof. When the boys came, he said they couldn't be his, claimed I'd shamed the family. His brother had died by then. So he sold what little I had and tried to barter me for the debt. Colter didn't speak. Snow shifted from the roof above, the weight of it sliding down with a low hiss. I left in the dark, Junia said. Walked for 2 days to Fort Laramie. Took nothing but what I carried. Colter nodded once. He shows up here, he won't leave with anything either. She looked at him steadily. If he puts a badge behind his words, you won't be able to stop him. I've got land rights, and I've got eyes. Let him try to lie with both. Junia turned back to the stove, but her shoulders stayed stiff. That evening, as the wind picked up and the fire burned low, Colter brought in a bundle wrapped in canvas hinges, lengths of iron, and a wooden bar. He set it beside the cabin door. Thought we'd reinforce it, he said. Come spring, maybe build a second one. But for now, this'll hold. Junia crouched beside the boys, wrapping Willis's feet in extra wool. I don't want a life spent hiding. Colter knelt down opposite her. Then we'll make one that doesn't need to. She looked up. You mean to keep us here? If you want to stay. Junia hesitated. You sure about what that means? I've spent 3 winters listening to nothing but wind and old fence wood cracking. I'm sure. She didn't answer right away, just reached over and put her hand on his. Her palm was dry and warm, calloused from work. There was no trembling in it now. The next day brought no rider, nor the one after. Days passed with the sky clear and the air sharp, and the boys began to crawl more steadily, their limbs stronger. Junia started reading the primer Colter had found in a forgotten crate, sounding out words by lamplight, whispering vowels as she rocked the cradle with her foot. Each night, Colter watched her, saying nothing, just carving small animal shapes from pine scraps and leaving them at the boy's feet. Near the end of the month, a wagon rolled into the yard. The driver was an older man with a red scarf and a missing finger, hauling sacks of flour and a crate of tin goods. He passed Colter a folded envelope. From the marshal, he said. Says the man left, headed east. Didn't say why. Colter read the note and burned it in the stove. Junia stood with her arms crossed, watching the letter curl into ash. He won't come back, Colter said. She nodded. I believe you. They spent the rest of the day moving Junia's things from the barn room into the cabin proper. Colter cleared a space beneath the front window, where the boys could watch the fire and the falling snow. Junia arranged the cradle there, then stood back, her hands on her hips. You've built this place strong, she said. He came to stand beside her. I didn't know back then what it was for. Just that it had to be mine. It's ours now, she said. That night, after the boys were down and the fire settled low, Junia pulled a folded cloth from beneath her pillow. Inside was a single silver ring plain, scuffed at the edges. I never wore it, she said. Didn't feel like it meant anything. Colter took it in his hand, turned it over in the firelight, then set it aside. Then let's make something that does. She looked at him, eyes steady, and placed her hand on his chest. I want to stay, she said. Not because I have to. Because I choose to. He wrapped his arms around her, held her there in the stillness. The wind pressed against the walls, but the cabin held firm. Spring came slow, the snow melting into thick mud and tangled grass. Wren took his first steps in the soft light of morning. Willis babbled to the goats, and Wit climbed anything he could reach. Junia planted beans and sweet corn in the narrow plot beside the barn, her hands brown from the soil. Colter built a second cradle, then a set of shelves. Then, one Sunday morning, he built a bench long enough for 5 and set it under the cottonwood. That summer, the preacher rode out from town. He stood with a Bible in one hand, Colter's in the other, as Junia took a ring carved from bone and slipped it onto his finger. The boys watched from the bench, half asleep in the sun. They didn't speak vows loud, just a few words quiet as breath. Junia wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin, and Colter wore his only clean shirt. Afterward, they sat on the stoop, hands twined, the boys crawling in the grass, the preacher already gone. I never thought I'd be happy, Junia said. Colter kissed her hand. I did. She rested her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the sky turn gold. The years passed with the steady rhythm of seasons. The boys grew strong, learned to ride and read and mend. Junia helped open the school, then taught there, her voice sure, her gaze steady. Colter never left the land again. He worked each day with quiet purpose, building not just fences and sheds, but a life. At night, they sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. They never spoke of what came before. They didn't have to. They were home.